What is interdisciplinary engineering education? How difficult is it to teach? And why is it considered an integral part of modern engineering studies? We discussed this with Professor Jan van der Veen, who chairs the Eindhoven School of Education in the Netherlands. He defines interdisciplinary as connecting across disciplines to solve difficult problems. He notes that the typical three-discipline approach within engineering schools is now outdated. He advocates that interdisciplinary engineering should start in secondary education and that interdisciplinary programs have the potential to create new forms of engineering identity.
Welcome to the European Engineering Educators podcast by SEFI, the European Society for Engineering Education. We're a non-profit international organisation active since 1973 and the largest European network of engineering educators. Our mission is to develop and improve engineering education and strengthen its image in society.
I'm Neil Cook.
And I'm Natalie Wint. We'll learn from Jan how his 4TU Centre for Engineering Education in the Netherlands brought together engineering schools across the country and developed valuable experience in teaching interdisciplinary, which is being used by faculties all across Europe. So to me, the term interdisciplinary is something I increasingly hear within engineering education, but often find it's sort of used in lots of different ways and different contexts to mean different things. So the majority of people I speak to make use of it when speaking about engineers working with other engineers from different engineering disciplines, whereas I tend to be more interested in how we as engineers can work with social sciences. So I'm quite interested to hear what Jan's view on this is. What's your experience with interdisciplinary, Neil?
Well, at Birmingham, I was lucky to develop one of the largest interdisciplinary modules in an engineering school, bringing together civil, electrical and mechanical disciplines. So we've got 70 teams of students, 30 academics and teaching assistants to support it. And I faced some incredible challenges getting it to run smoothly, pushback from my peers, students who were really struggling with some of the concepts, and working out how to get those disciplines to work together, despite drawing on all of the literature in the area, including what was going on in the Netherlands and what Jan's going to talk about today. And I still don't think I'm quite there with how we assess interdisciplinarity. I don't think it's a solved problem.
So welcome, Jan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Natalie. Great to be here.
Thank you. So Jan van der Veen chairs the Eindhoven School of Education at TU Eindhoven, focusing on teacher training and projects in higher engineering education. He chaired the SEFI 2020 conference, and in 2019 he won the National Commencius Leadership Grant to improve interdisciplinary engineering education. He has co-authored reviews and case studies on interdisciplinary and has a background in experimental physics and a PhD in education. So, Jan, I'm really interested in your sort of route from experimental physics to education and teacher training. Is that something you'd be able to talk a bit about?
Yeah, happy to do so. I was a physics teacher actually after my university training, and then I moved on to the university and was intrigued by the silos of the different disciplines and tried to find ways to connect them. And that I saw occasions where that happened very well in research, but I saw also lots of opportunities to do so in education.
Yeah, that really helps sort of frame your interest in interdisciplinary.
Yeah, that's there from the start, and I always find academics who also are eager to cross the boundaries with other disciplines. Together we can work out nice examples of interdisciplinary education, and that's appreciated by many students, and I think they really develop competencies that are both for their professional life but also for the personal development very valuable.
Hello, Jan.
Hi, Neil.
So the Eindhoven University of Technology, which is abbreviated to TU/E, is a public technical university in the Netherlands, has a population of 20,000, has been ranked 99th in the world. Jan, could you tell us something about engineering education at TUE?
Yeah, happy to do so, Neil. I think that the technical university is doing very well at the moment. We're placed in a region of Eindhoven with brainport industries. So that includes Philips, ASML, NXP, lots of other high-tech companies.
Yeah,
And that is a nice context for the technical university.
amazing. So before we start on your work in this area, could you describe what is meant by interdisciplinarity and why you think it is important?
Interdisciplinary engineering education involves those types of education in which problems are tackled by students where just one discipline cannot solve the problem. So you need expertise from different disciplines
Yeah.
and not in just connecting the pieces, but really interconnecting across these topics.
So how many disciplines typically would be a part of a interdisciplinary team?
What I've seen so far in case studies, often teacher teams opt for putting students together from 3 different disciplines, but we're now also opting for a second year in which students from any discipline can work together on problems. So that could be up to 5 or 6 different disciplines.
Yeah, that's interesting. And are these disciplines all engineering disciplines?
We have science and maths as well, but also psychology and technology and some
Yeah.
managerial programs. So we have a bit of social sciences, but we have also international projects with students from other universities, both in the Netherlands, Utrecht and Wageningen, for example, but also internationally with EPFL in Lausanne, TTU Copenhagen, München.
And so why do you think there's a need for this? I mean, I guess the need's always been there, but do you see that this is increasingly important for engineers?
I think so, Natalie. And with the global development goals of the United Nations, you see that many of these goals you cannot tackle through one discipline only. And most recently, in the COVID pandemic, we saw that many technicians started to build machines that could be helpful in hospitals. And of course, that's important. But the bigger problem is not just the technology and not just the medical part of it. You also have psychology, communication, politics, lots of angles that need to be viewed if you want to really understand the problem and help solve it.
Mm. And this is something that students recognise, is it? I mean, do you find that students are aware that that's something they need to develop and they appreciate that?
Some students do that from the start, and others need some experience with that. Mostly they think, well, I chose electrical engineering, so why are you bothering me with other disciplines? And later on, they understand, okay, the complexity of this problem was really beyond my own expertise. And I think those teams are also an option to together work on also on the ethics aspects in a more natural way compared to separate courses, I think.
So, Jan, you said that one discipline cannot solve the problem, and we are kind of into the 2020s, maybe going beyond the 3 discipline approach. When I looked at setting up these modules, I found there was lots of similar terms that were used to describe this interdisciplinary concept, multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinarity. And in your own work, you suggest that sometimes these terms and concepts are used ambivalently or interchangeably. Which terms do you use now, and how do you distinguish them?
Indeed, in our review study, we found that these terms were used in many different ways, and I think often teachers who put together students from different disciplines, but the students stay on their own side, then they might call it interdisciplinary, but actually it is multidisciplinary. The level of crossing boundaries, that's sort of also an indicator for where you are on the spectrum. So are you just working together and putting the pieces together? That would be more multidisciplinary like. If you really try to integrate the different disciplines and also try to understand each other's way of working. The transdisciplinary is, of course, even more ambitious,
Yeah.
going into a fully fledged integrated approach.
Yeah. And you mentioned this concept of boundary crossing. Could you give us some more ideas about what we mean by boundary crossing and perhaps an example from your own work?
Well, with boundary crossings, what we see in student teams that sometimes they just split up the work and then after a few weeks they piece it together. So that's not boundary crossing. And
No.
I think if the teams have the best results if they really try to integrate their solutions in a nice way and have a continuous communication with each other. Also try to understand how the other disciplines work, what methods they apply, and what they can take from that.
With respect to this sort of concept of boundary crossing, I'm just wondering how sort of aware students are of where the boundaries are. I'm just wondering if these are clear boundaries.
Not always, I think. Many engineers understand that the use of mathematics and physics is always there. And so that's, if you would call it interdisciplinary, you would be interdisciplinary all of the times. In particular, when you involve social science, that's when the engineers feel more like, okay, now we're in terra incognita domains.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I guess this sort of the variety of different sort of terms we might use and concepts sort of suggests that we might need to have some strategies for when we're planning this type of interdisciplinary learning. In one of your publications, you sort of break it down to vision, teaching and support. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about this.
Yeah, that's what we found in the review study, that this way of breaking down could be helpful. And I think a lot of the initiatives, like the one that Neil mentioned, start from teachers who see the need of this and then start their own course and find a place in the curriculum to do so. But then it hardly ever spreads to the whole curriculum, and it is not part of the overall learning objectives of the programs that much. So you need a good connection between what are the learning objectives of your program or of your university. Do you indeed envision responsible engineers at the end of the program? So then there's a good need to integrate ethics into the interdisciplinary projects in different stages of the curriculum. Of course, you need the teachers on board and that they are willing to implement this. You should work with teacher teams, is my vision on that, because teachers at academy are mostly specialists in one area. And if you ask them to be an interdisciplinary teacher, that works better if you put together a nice team. And of course, the support area, if you envision that you need a lot of interdisciplinary education with projects and outside problem owners like that, you also need the learning spaces, for example, and workplaces where they can produce artifacts and models on computers that could be helpful in their projects. So putting the pieces together on the different levels is important if you really want to move on and not just have some developments in single courses.
Yeah, sure. So it's definitely a program approach, really, and a sort of alignment between these three sort of aspects.
Okay, Jan, so we have the educational strategies for interdisciplinary learning, breaking down across vision, teaching and support. Could you elaborate on this and give an example of where you've seen this in action?
Well, I've seen this in action at the University of Twente in the course Product Design with students from different disciplines.
Yeah.
And across these disciplines, there was agreement about the time slots, how the students would be composing the different teams, and also how teachers from the different disciplines work together in the assignments and the assessments. Outside problem owners who really put a nice challenge on the table.
So what was the project you gave students, and what disciplines were involved?
Well, the disciplines involved were mechanical engineering and design students, and also business administration students who took aim at the more the business side, so the business case, added value proposition in the early parts of the project, some life cycle analysis to do. Mechanical engineering students were busy putting the devices together that were necessary to either produce something for a beer caterer who needed crates, or a trolley for babies, or whatever kind of subject they were given. And the design students were very busy with the outlook and what the users would like. And
So you mentioned about sort of external providers of problems there. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a bit about that and sort of how it works and whether you think that's the sort of best approach to doing this kind of work.
I think outside problem owners bring realistic problems, authentic problems. That's very motivating for students, and it is also a first glance at what students will do in their professional life. So that brings the development of professional skills at the table.
Sure.
It's the best way. It's also laborious because sometimes the problem that comes from outside is not the real problem, so you have to talk it through.
Mm-hmm.
So the making these connections and handling the connections with the businesses in a proper way is part of the job if you want to do it on a large scale.
Yeah. And I guess to some degree, you need to make sure that the problem that a business is bringing sort of aligns with the content that students have sort of learnt up to that point. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, for the professional development skills, it doesn't matter that much. You still have the communication, the teamwork, and communication skills that will be developed. But a matching with the types of problems that come in and students that you want to match with that's a really logistical challenge. There are different numbers of students in the different disciplines.
So Jan, in my own practice, I touched upon before, I've faced many challenges introducing these kinds of teachings, and some of the feedback I got was that it was seen as diluting the discipline-based skills that we could be focusing on. There's unclear definitions of interdisciplinary, which we've also touched on today, and it's kind of seen as a bit too social sciences for a engineering degree. What challenges have you faced? Are they similar? And how have you overcome them?
I recognize these challenges definitely, and I think it is also very important for academics to take a good look of whether this is added value for their program, and not just do it because everybody is doing it. So that's a good debate to have. Ways to overcome that, I see in universities two approaches. One is to convince and try to integrate it in traditional programs.
Yeah.
And the other way is just start new programs on interdisciplinary topics, biomedical engineering, creative technology, medical technology. So some universities go in that direction because they think it's much easier to start from scratch with new programs.
Yeah.
And then the traditional programs are a sort of havens for the students who want to dive into deep.
One of the things I've seen emerging in many sort of universities is this idea of an equivalent to a liberal arts degree in STEM. So you have liberal science degrees where you do a lot more boundary crossing. Do you think that there should be more of those kinds of new degrees where there are an interdisciplinary label?
I think they're really helpful in fast forwarding this kind of direction in engineering education, and they are, for the more traditional programs, they are sort of living lab, and we can look and see what works and adapt that as well in the more traditional programs, I think. So there's place for both. But indeed, I think that there are many students also at secondary school level who already say that, okay, the big problems from our planet, the Sustainable Development Goal projects, for example, they need a more integrated approach. And where do we find it in our school program? And what university programs are trying to cover that?
I think that's it's a really good point about sort of students in school and their expectations. It sounds from what you're saying that students in schools are ready for this and like want this integration. I guess from my experience, what I've seen is that it's almost a risk engaging in these types of interdisciplinary courses because maybe there's no clear path or sort of career pathway. So I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree with the more open kind of projects, or ill-defined, as they are sometimes called, or wicked problems. One of the challenges for both staff and students is that it's not obvious what the path will be if you go through the project. You might have wonderful outcomes, but also sometimes teams end up in a dead-end street, and you have to find a way to overcome that. Whereas with the more traditional courses, you know which chapters in the book will be covered. Students will have tests from recent years so that they can already try and see if they are at the right level to pass the test. But it's more exciting, but it's also the range of what's going to happen is quite wide. And both teachers and students, some see that as a risk, and I'm also always excited if something like that starts, and the excitement is partly also caused by what's going to happen.
Sure.
And in the end, we all overcome this and sort of celebrate the great achievements. But it has a different flavor and different emotions as well, I think.
Yeah. I think to some degree it involves like more of a development of trust between educators and students, maybe.
Definitely, it involves trust and giving away a bit of the control that we normally have. Yeah.
Another challenge I've had with interdisciplinarity in engineering is to assess the students on these interdisciplinary skills, be it boundary crossing skills. It seems to me that there's two approaches. You can directly assess interdisciplinarity, or you can just measure some of the outputs of the project and indirectly assess interdisciplinary.
Well, my take would be that it depends on the learning objectives that you have with a certain course.
Okay.
I would propose that you would increase the complexity if you go from project 1 to project 2 to project 3. And in the end, you would definitely expect the students to be able to cross boundaries and understand the methods that other disciplines use. And that could go as far as that the team would be interviewed by the teacher team at the end, and that questions could be posed and directed to any of the project team members, so that each student should be able to answer certain questions, either by being responsible for a certain task in the project team or having been told about that by other project team members. That's the main thing from the teacher perspective, and I would also propose that there are all sorts of options to integrate peer assessment, both formative and summative, in their ability and willingness to cross boundaries.
Yeah, so you can ask students directly about how they crossed boundaries, so that kind of idea of, I suppose, a reflective kind of commentary, which may come out in an interview.
You can, yeah, definitely, yeah, I think so. In an interview, you can do so by just raising that specific question: how did the quality of your contribution improve by contributions from the other disciplines? Where did you integrate that?
So that's very much a direct approach, isn't it? That's very much making interdisciplinary explicit in students' minds and getting them to reflect on it.
I don't think we do that enough yet.
No.
And for peer review, I think it also always very much helps if you give them a bit of a rubric.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it helps if you formulate this rubric, because that always makes it explicit what you value in a certain course.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, one of the observations I've made is that actually having interdisciplinary studies strengthens the disciplinary identity, because, you know, usually it's just implicit in what people are doing, but what you're doing is actually bringing that out into the open. I think that this idea of disciplinary identity can sometimes be accelerated by teaching interdisciplinary. Is that your experience?
Well, my experience is thinking about Xin Ming, who's one of my PhDs, looking at developing in identity in a liberal arts college. And
wow.
Actually, the engineering and social sciences are connected there.
Yeah.
But then still he finds that some of the teachers, when they put together teams, they still refer to which of the students are more techies and which are more of the social science kind of students.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to find the words of what kind of identity are we really talking about. If we're talking about the ones who are sort of in the middle, being able to make the connections and maybe be good project leader in complex problem solving kind of situations.
And it seems to me, as we've said previously, if you introduce this concept at secondary schools where learners are actually looking at lots of subjects anyway before they specialise, it will make our job easier once they've come into to universities.
I think so. And in secondary school, there are a growing number of examples where cross disciplines projects by students from secondary school are taking place. And actually, do you have similar problems of the silos? That, well, I'm a physics teacher, so if I'm part of a team that has to do something with a water project, well, there are small animals swimming around in the water or whatever. I don't know nothing about it. How can I teach that? So another reason to, at least for now, to have teacher teams with the several relevant disciplines at the table.
So that's clearly the next frontier of interdisciplinarity then, to perhaps reach into secondary education. Is there anything else you think that we need to think about in terms of interdisciplinary engineering education over the next few years?
I think in our review study we found that there are lots of engineers who see the interdisciplinarity in their research areas, and quite a few of them are also translating that into new kinds of education. But the technical universities often don't have a lot of opportunities to work well with social sciences. So here we have to find a solution for. So that's the next step in connecting with other higher education institutes that can bring that expertise, and for our engineers to at least once have this experience of working in a team with people who really have a completely other way of looking at the problem. And I think that would be a wonderful experience for students.
Yeah, and thank you so much for joining us today. Just to finish off, I'm wondering if you could give us one final piece of advice to share with our listeners who want to introduce or further develop interdisciplinary engineering education within their own context.
My advice would be to find enthusiastic colleagues from other disciplines and work out something together. In the meantime, also take an international outlook. There are lots of bright examples around, well described in the European Journal for Engineering Education, but having a visit to a place where it really is taking place is also very inspiring. And then just do it.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jan.
Happy to do so. And good luck with the other podcast.
Interdisciplinarity is a challenge to teach. What was your key takeaway today from Jan's insights into that area?
Yeah, I guess, like, I agree with you, Neil. It is complicated and that. But also I think I took that, you know, we've got lots of expertise in this now, building lots of, like, a community around this. And there's also lots of good opportunities to sort of work together across SEFI and across Europe to sort of develop this further. So I think also it's an exciting time to try and learn more about this and develop our practice in this area.
Yeah.
What was your key takeaway? I know you've maybe had more experience than me at sort of teaching interdisciplinaries.
My takeaway would be that the assessment of interdisciplinary, it has to be multifaceted. And what I'm going to take away from this is I'm going to rethink how to assess those interdisciplinary skills. Thanks again to our guest, Professor Jan van der Veen from TU Eindhoven. I'm Neil Cook.
And I'm Natalie Wint. And you've been listening to the European Engineering Educators Podcast. Thank you for listening.